polar bear is a species of bear that is native to the Arctic Circle, the Arctic Ocean and the surrounding seas and lands. The polar bear is one of the largest bear species and is about the same size as the Kodiak bear. An adult male weighs between 350 and 700 kilograms, while female bears weigh about half of a male bear. Although the polar bear is a sister species to the brown bear, it has evolved to cover a smaller area, and unlike the omnivorous brown bear, this animal is almost a carnivore. Many of the physical characteristics of the polar bear are optimized to survive in low temperatures, to move through snow, ice, and water, and to hunt the jaws that are an important part of its diet. Although most polar bears are born on land, they spend most of their lives in sea ice. Their scientific name, sea bear, is also derived from this fact. Because of their dependence on the sea, polar bears belong to the group of marine mammals. Due to the warming of the Earth and the destruction of the habitat of polar bears, this animal is classified as a vulnerable species. Of course, by quotas and limiting the hunting of polar bears, an attempt has been made to prevent the destruction of this animal. Historically, polar bear is also called white bear. Ursus, a family separated from carnivores nearly 38 million years ago. The origin of the Ursina or Curtian subfamily goes back to approximately 4.2 million years ago. The oldest known fossil from a polar bear is a jawbone from 110,000 to 130,000 years ago, which was found in 2004 in Prince Karlsfjord. This fossil shows that between 10,000 and 20,000 years ago, the large molars of polar bears underwent a significant transformation compared to the teeth of brown bears. It is possible that polar bears are a branch of the brown bear population that separated from mother bears during a Pleistocene ice age, or that these bears settled in the eastern part of Siberia, such as the Kamchatka Peninsula. The signs obtained from DNA analysis are much more complex. The mitochondrial DNA of the polar bear diverged from the brown bear nearly 150,000 years ago, while there are clades of the brown bear family whose mitochondrial DNA is closer to the polar bear than to other brown bears. This means that according to the concept of species, maybe the polar bear cannot be considered as a separate species. For example, the mitochondrial DNA of the extinct Irish brown bear is particularly close to that of polar bears. The comparison between the nuclear DNA of polar and brown bears shows that their pattern is different, and genetically, it can be said that they form two different clades that diverged nearly 603,000 years ago. Today's research no longer examines DNA separately, such as mitochondria or nucleus, but compares a complete gene, and based on this type of research, polar and brown bears were separated 400,000 years ago. Of course, there have been matings between these two species, which shows that they probably came into contact with each other during the warm seasons when brown bears were driven to the north and polar bears to the land. Most brown bears share about 2% of their genetic material with polar bears, but there is a population of bears called the ABC Islands bears that share between 5 and 10%, suggesting that they interbred with polar bears closer to the present. Has happened. In case of mating between a polar bear and a brown bear, a hybrid polar grizzly bear is obtained. The history of the separation of the generations of these two bears is not very old, and new evidence shows that there has been the most mating between these two breeds, so these two species of bears have remained very similar. Despite all the similarities between these two bears, they should still be classified into two different species because none of these two species can live in another habitat for a long time. And other phenotypic characteristics are different. When the name polar bear was first recorded in scientific records, two subspecies were identified for it. The first subspecies was introduced in 1774 by Constantine J. Philipp and the second by Peter Simon Pallas in 1776. These two introduced species are considered invalid today. A few years ago, a fossil of a polar bear was found, which was much larger than living bears today, but research shows that this fossil probably belongs to a brown bear and not a polar bear. The polar bear is considered a marine mammal because it spends most months of the year in the water. But it is the only marine mammal alive that has very strong arms and legs and can walk or run long distances. Polar bears prefer to live in the sea ice that covers the surface of the continental shelf and the Arctic archipelago. These areas are called Arctic life circles, because they are biologically more fertile than the deep waters of the north. Every once in a while, bears go to the places where the sea ice leads to the water because they can hunt seals there, which is their main food. In their living environment, access to fresh water is very limited because most of it is in the form of snow. Polar bears can produce water through a biological process from the fat on the surface of the seal's body, so polar bears are more often seen in areas where there are more seals. Every year, the amount of ice in the region changes with seasonal changes, and this causes the migration of the polar bears, and as a result, the polar bears also migrate after them. In areas such as Hudson Bay and James Bay, the ice melts completely, so the bears have to go on land and wait a few months for the seawater to freeze again.